We've been doing this series started a series last week on faith that works when life doesn't. Certainly all of us face challenges in our lives, and all of us have troubles in our lives, and all of us have different things in our lives we go through. The book of James is probably the best book in all of the New Testament that tells us what to do. By the way, upstairs, I'm not getting any sound through my headset, and it's not going on our live feed either. I think this down here is turned off as well. There it goes. All right, at least it's going through the live feed now anyway. But again, we've been talking about these things that we've been doing and problems that we've had, the crisis that we're currently in, and some of the things that we need to do in order to process that. We talked about the idea last week. He says, James, a servant of the God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. They were scattered because of persecution. They were scattered because of their faith. They were scattered and there was a crisis. They were scattered because they believed in God, and they were suffering a lot of different things as a result of that. They could lose their home. They could be killed. They had all kinds of troubles. But he says here in James chapter 1, 2 through 6, he says, when all kinds of trials crowd into your lives, and we certainly have all kinds of trials, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Realize they come to test your faith and to produce in you the quality of endurance. But let the process go on until the endurance is fully developed, and you will become a person of mature character and integrity with no weak spots. We said things last week. We said, number one, problems are inevitable. You just need to understand that to begin with. One thing that he tells us in this is these are some things you should know. And I think when you know certain things, someone said to be forewarned is to be forearmed. You need to know that problems are inevitable. It's not something good people, bad people, all people have problems. Now, the difference is how you deal with those problems in your life. Problems are inevitable. He says when all kinds of trials crowd into your lives, not if all kinds of trials, or maybe some kind of trials, when they come, because they're going to come. They're inevitable. Then we said last week that problems were variable. Your problems might not be the same problem as my problem. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. They're just, everybody has different trials and tribulations in their lives. I don't know what yours is. You don't know what mine are, but we all have them, and they're variable. Then he said, when all kinds of trials come into your lives. Then we said, problems are unpredictable. You just don't know when they're going to come. They could come at any moment. They could come at any time. They could come when usually they come when you least expect it. They don't call you up and say, I'd like to schedule trouble for Wednesday of this week. You say, well, I'll put that on my schedule. It doesn't happen that way. Trials come, they're unpredictable. I mentioned last week, usually when you're in a hurry, that's when you have a flat tire. When you hurry, that's when something happens. You brought the baby this morning, on the way to church. That's when the baby usually throws up on you, that kind of thing. By the way, we're glad to see you guys this morning. First time at church, and don't get too close. I know you want to love on that baby, but we're trying to distance 6 feet. It's hard when there's a new baby in the house. But, they're unpredictable. It says, when all kinds of trials crowd into your lives as intruders. Someone breaks into your house. They don't make an appointment for that either. And trials are that way. Problems, though, we said, are purposeful. Whether you realize it or not, there are a purpose for your trials that God allows to come in your life. And we talked about some of those purposes for trials and troubles and tribulations in your life. We said, realize that they come to produce in you. So there's a reason for them. If you will use the trials and tribulations in your life, become better rather than bitter, it'll make you a better person. And he says God can use these things in your life. And we said one of the things that it does is it tests our faith. What do you really believe in? If you put your faith in your money, or you put your faith in your family, or you put your faith in your friends, or you put your faith in anything but God, you're going to find out that they don't hold up. This week has kind of been, I guess God was preparing me for these series of lessons. This has been an interesting week for me. We had a dear friends of ours who have 3 boys that are the perfect picture of a family. Their oldest son died of a drug overdose this week. The funeral was on Thursday. This boy was 25 years old. handsome young man. He was dating a former Teen Universe Kentucky, and been dating her for 5 years, was a manager of a place, and all these different things. Him and 3 other boys went golfing last Saturday. Came home. I'm sure one of the boys said, man, you need to try this. Don't worry about it. I've done it 100 times. Never had a problem. They found all 4 of them laying on the floor. They weren't able to revive him. 2 brothers that adored him. And, it was just so pitiful to see them stand at that casket and try to, close that casket, knowing that was the last time they were ever going to see their boy. You talk about a test of your faith. Trials come in that way. We don't know. And then we talked about, realize that they come to test your faith. And then he says, problems develop my endurance. They make me stronger. He says, and to produce in you a quality of endurance. The King James says, the trying of your faith worketh patience. It makes you better. You learn some things. Sometimes maybe we have these trials and tribulations coming into our lives because God is trying to produce in us. He's going to put us through testings. He's saying, listen, if you'll get this down, I can move on to something else. But some of us evidently don't get it because God keeps putting it on. Said, I'm going to do this until you get it right. But they produce it in you and do this. Then we said, finally we get to this point. This is where we are today. James says that the third thing that troubles do, he says, troubles mature my character. They test my faith. They develop my endurance. They mature my character. Look in verse 4. He says, but let the process, and it's a process of maturity. You don't just get this overnight. It's a process that we go through. Let the process go on until you become men of mature character with integrity and with no weak spots. Wouldn't you like to be like that? He says that's what happens when you learn to respond to troubles correctly. Years ago I read of a famous study that was done in Russia where they did the effects of different living conditions, affected the longevity, the lifespan of different animals. In other words, scientists discovered that animals placed in comfortable and easy living conditions actually became weaker and were more susceptible to disease. And they died sooner in those comfortable conditions than those who are allowed to experience the normal hardships of life. Well, I think that's the same thing true with human life. So how does God want us to respond to troubles in the crises that we face in our life? Well, James chapter 1 gives us the answer. He gives us a very radical, very countercultural response to what we're supposed to do. They're radical, but they're the right response. You might want to write these down. 4 ways to respond to the troubles in life. A faith that isn't troubled by troubles. That's the title of our lesson. Number 1, rejoice in the problem because God can use it. That's the first thing you do. When you're in trouble, rejoice knowing that God can use it. Now, God can use anything you give it. Even the troubles that other people create that are meant to bring harm to you, God can take those troubles and turn them around. Wasn't it, Joseph who said to his family, he said, you meant this, what? To harm me? But God meant it for good? In Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, and James chapter 1 and verse 2, read it again. It says, my friends, when you have many kinds of troubles, you should be full of joy. Consider pure joy whenever you face trials. What? Don't misunderstand it. He's not saying deny reality. He's not saying pretend there are no problems. He's not saying fake it till you make it. He's not saying put on a plastic smile and a mask and have a Pollyanna, look at things, the sun will come up tomorrow, and all that, and live in denial. No, that's not what he's talking about here. He's not saying that at all when he says you should be joyful. And by the way, he's not saying some form of masochism, which is, oh boy, I get to suffer, whoopee. You're not meant to be a martyr. You don't have a martyr complex. In other words, oh, I feel so spiritual, I feel bad. You know, no, that's not what God is saying. We don't rejoice for the troubles, but we can still rejoice during the troubles because of what we know is true. And what we do know is true. You know, I said at the beginning of this lesson, the reason we can do it is because of the things that we know. That's what James says there in the beginning of that section there. We know that we're never alone. We know that God is with us. We know that God will give us strength if we trust Him. But the greatest comfort of all, and when you're going through a pain and when you're going through troubles, the greatest comfort of all, Romans chapter 8 and 28, one of the greatest verses in the Bible where God promises good as an outcome even of the bad. In Romans 8:28, he says, we know that in everything God works for good to those who love Him. Now circle the word everything. That includes COVID-19. That includes election cycles. That includes riots. That includes whatever. In everything, God works for good to those who love Him. Now, that's not a promise to everybody. That is a promise for those who love Him. It's a promise to those who want to live according to His purpose. But what is He saying there? He's saying that when you're at a tough time like we are right now, joy is a choice. It's a choice to rejoice. It's not based on circumstances. It is based on what we know. It's based on faith. We know that in all things, God works together for good to them that love Him. I choose. It is a choice to rejoice. As David said in Psalm 34 in verse 1, I will bless the Lord at all times. At all times, not just in good times. I'm going to thank God. I'm going to praise God. I'm going to rejoice with God at all times. He says, I will. That is a choice of the will. It is a decision that I make. I'm not rejoicing for my problems. That's masochism. I'm rejoicing that God will use it for good in my life. So no matter what I'm going through, I know that He is going to use it for good. I rejoice knowing that God will use it in my life. Number two, the second thing James says to do in troubles is relax. Asking God for wisdom. He doesn't say, he says, don't panic. Don't panic. Pray. Don't worry. He says, worship, relax and trust God. Ask God for wisdom in your life. James 1 and verse 7. I love this in the Phillips translation. It says here, if in the process any of you doesn't know how to meet any particular problem, you only have to ask God, who gives generously to all men without making them feel guilty. And you may be sure that the necessary wisdom will be given to you. That's a promise. I'll give you the wisdom that you need. He says, God isn't holding back wisdom. God gives wisdom to anybody who asks for it. Have you asked for God to give you wisdom on how to handle maybe the different crises that are going on in your life? You know, a lot of times what we do, we try to figure it out on our own. We come up with all these different plans and all this process and all these different things that we do. And we try to do all these different things. And then at the end we come up and we say, well, okay, I guess all that's left is to pray. He said, no, you need to start with that. You need to ask God for wisdom. Have you asked Him for wisdom on what you to do about your job, or what to do about your future, or what to do about your kids, or what to do about whatever you're struggling with? God says ask for wisdom, and He says He's willing to give it to us, and I love this word, generously. God gives wisdom to anybody who asks for it. You say, well, why do I need wisdom? Well, you need wisdom, first of all, for a couple of reasons. You need wisdom so that I can learn from the troubles. Okay, every trouble is an education. God, what are you trying to teach me here when I have trouble in my life? What is it that you want me to learn here? But more than that, second, I need wisdom so I know what to do. I'm saying that when you go through trouble, like maybe what we're going through right now, is don't ask why. Why is this happening? But ask what. What do you want me to learn? Don't ask why, ask what. What do you want me to learn, God, from whatever particular crisis that you're going through in your life? And I'll tell you, the devil wants you to use your troubles to defeat you, but God wants to use your troubles to develop you, okay? What other people and what the devil means is to defeat you. God says, no, I want to use this to develop you. So I rejoice in knowing that God is going to help me, and I need to relax, asking for wisdom. Relax. And then the third thing that I do, James says in this next verse, is rely on God, believing He'll help. Rely on God, believing that He'll help. Verse 8, but you must ask in sincere faith without secret doubts. You ask God for wisdom. You must sincerely believe and expect Him to answer without doubting. Circle, sincerely believe. Circle, sincerely believe and expect. Expect Him to answer without doubting. That is the reliance part. What is sincere belief? It's total reliance on God. You rely on the truth that God has promised to help you and to strengthen you. You rely on the truth that God says, I can use this. You rely on the truth that God says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. You rely on the truth that He says, I am with you always. I love the verse where David says in Psalm 116, 6 and 7, when I was helpless, God saved me, and I said to myself, relax, relax, because the Lord takes care of you. Have you ever said that? Have you ever relaxed? Tell yourself, hey, just relax. The Lord will take care of you. That's the third point in the reliance on God. Then you can relax. Now, early in verse 2, remember we saw that troubles are variable. They come in different sizes, different shapes, all kinds of troubles. Well, did you know that the phrase that troubles are variable, they come in all sizes, but when I found in 1 Peter chapter 10 and verse 20, the same statement said that there's many kinds of grace. 1 Peter chapter 10 and verse 14, grace is variable. Now, what is that saying? God gives us many kinds of grace to meet the many kinds of troubles that we have. For every trouble in your life, there's a different kind of grace for it. Now, you see, I want to point out that trouble doesn't automatically produce good in your life. For a lot of people, trouble makes them bitter, not better. They're not any better. They're bitter because the trouble's in their lives. What makes the difference is your faith makes a difference. The faith that works when life doesn't. Your faith makes a difference. It's what you choose to rely on during your troubles. First, I rejoice knowing that God will use the troubles in my life. Second, I relax asking God for wisdom. Third, I rely on God, believing that He's going to help me. And here's the fourth thing that James says, so that you're not troubled by trouble. Number 4, refuse to quit. Remember God's promises. Refuse to quit. That's the endurance part. Remembering God's promises. Now, God gives us many, many, many promises in the Bible. As a matter of fact, there are over 7,000 promises in the Bible that God gives to us. We will never face our troubles on our own. But James mentions a particular promise that I think is really important in this current crisis. In James chapter 1 and verse 12, he says, happy are those who remain faithful under trials. That's troubles. Blessed is the person who perseveres under trials, because when he stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to them who love Him. Happy are those who remain faithful under trials. Another version says, because when they succeed in passing such a test, they will receive as their reward the life which God has promised to those who love Him. The promise, every promise has a premise. If you persevere, it tells us in Revelation, be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give you the crown of life. The whole reason that I'm teaching this series is because I want you to get the reward from God. The truth is, suffering is part of life. You're going to suffer no matter what. Whether you use it or you don't use it, whether you benefit from it or whether you don't benefit from it, you're going to have troubles in your life. Whether you get the reward or don't get the reward. Whether you respond correctly or respond incorrectly, you're going to suffer in life. You're going to have problems in life. You may as well use it for good. Don't waste your sorrow. Don't waste your suffering. Don't waste your troubles. You're going to face troubles in your life. You may be in one right now. You know, what's going on around us. The only two questions that really matter are these. Number one, will you turn to God for help? Or will you let God teach you some things and learn from it? Those are the only things that really matter. Will you turn to God, and will you let Him use what's going on to help you? Those are the only things that really matter. Now, if you don't do that, if you turn to God for help, and you let God teach you in your problems, what does He say? You're going to receive the reward. There's a reward at the end. That's the promise of James chapter 1 and verse 12. I'm asking you to do this. Look at this during especially these troubled times. And again, James talks about it all. We're going to talk about temptations and what do you do when temptations comes, because there's a lot of temptations out there in the world, and we're especially tempted to get really negative in this age which we're living in right now. It's really tempting to get caught up in all the stuff that's going on around us and be drawn away from God and be drawn into. I tell Gail all the time, I said, she'll get ready to go somewhere, and I say, honey, I know you're going to go, but don't get sucked in. Don't let them suck you in, because they'll do it. They'll tell you the story. Number one, I've always learned there's always two sides to every story. And there's three. There's your side, their side, and the right side. But there's always all these different. I said, don't get sucked in. She'll get in there, bless her heart, she'll say something on the internet, and she'll read. I said, honey, don't get sucked in. But we do that. And so we're going to be looking at some of that. We're going to be looking at, all the different things that we're talking about today. How to use your tongue. Right now, man, I'll tell you what, social media has gotten, I guess people lost their filter with social media. They will either say some of the dumbest stuff you've ever heard or some of the meanest stuff you've ever heard. And we're going to talk about how to control your tongue. And then we're going to be talking about some of the other things that James talks about in this section of Scripture. We need, right now, as in any time in history, we need what James is telling us. Because we are going through trials. We're all going through, school's fixing to start back. Somebody said, I saw a post that says, man, you ought to watch the online talk about opening up school. So you wouldn't believe the comments people are making. Guys, relax. It'll be okay. There'll be some kids get it. When we start back school, just know it. James says, these things I tell you, that if you know going in what to expect, don't be surprised by it. You know what I mean? But we all get shocked about every little thing. And so we need to start trusting in God. Not trusting in our trying, but trusting in His dying. Trusting in what God has done and what He will do, and how that He'll use even the difficulties in your life. You may be here this morning going through some trials and tribulations in your life. We want to be here for you. We're here for you. That's what part of the family, being part of the family of God here is. If we can help you in doing, and if maybe you need to come, you've got sin in your life. Maybe you're going through a trial and you say, I can't do this by myself. We'll pray for you and with you. We'll help you as much as we can. Maybe you need to start trusting God. Maybe you need to start going to Him before you start going to some other source. But this morning, if we could help you, maybe you want to become a Christian. Again, if you're ready to become a Christian, our baptistry is ready. And we're ready 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're here to help you. If you want to make that confession of faith, we're here for you. I talked to a young lady after the funeral the other day and told her, I said, you call me up and I'll come whenever. She knows she needs to be baptized. She hadn't been yet. She'd be raised up in the church. I'm going to tell you, we're in some troubling times. How in the world is somebody going to make it without God? You just can't. Now is the time to be sharing with your friends and your neighbors about the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. Now is the time to tell people about the joy, even in your trials. That you know what, I can have peace, even in the midst of my trials. Now is the time to do that. If we can help you this morning, whatever your need might be, I want to encourage you as we stand, we offer the invitation.